if may I ask, please keep your comments and questions less than 1 minute so that they have an opportunity to answer the questions.
Assalamu alaikum. This question is to any of the panelists. It's kind of off topic, but when America was bombed by the Japanese on December 7th, 1941, and the day after that, a bunch of Japanese American citizens were put in concentration camps. And now let's say after the 9/11 attacks, all the Muslims were placed in concentration camps, and then we were later released. My question is, where would we be? Where would we go? What would we do after we were released? And would there be a higher rate of Islamophobia?
I don't know. Okay, that's a loaded set of questions, but I'll give it a try. Well, it's important to understand also that after Japanese internment, there was a court ruling called Kuramatsu that basically validated the internment of Japanese Americans. And so even the courts were not on the side of the rights, the human rights, as well as the civil rights of Japanese Americans at that time. And so we, I think, living in 2011, are not at that point that Japanese Americans had to deal with at that time. But what happened after Japanese Americans were released from their concentration camps, and in California there's a camp called Manzanar, and every time we're driving up there, I make it a point to take my kids to go visit them, because it is a museum that needs to be, it's a landmark that we have to remember, because it should not happen to any group. And so, your question is, what would happen to us if, would there be Islamophobia? Absolutely. And what happened with Japanese Americans is that, I don't know if you can say it took that to get them to be civically engaged, but after that, they worked tirelessly to make sure that the United States government acknowledged what happened, apologized for what happened, and provided reparations to families who were victims of this kind of internment and incarceration. And that led them to more civic engagement. That created people like Daniel Inouye to serve in the US Senate, and Robert Matsui, and now Mike Honda, who is a congressman in Northern California. And they all work as leaders of America and leaders within their own community. And I think that's a lesson for us. Our mosque should not just produce leaders for our community. Our mosque should be producing leaders for America. And it's better to do that now than to wait until a disaster happens and then say, okay, now we got to get more involved. We got to get more. 9/11 was a wake-up call. Wake-up call in terms of terrorism, a wake-up call in terms of Islamophobia, a wake-up call in terms of the need to get out there. And if we become complacent, then we are just, it's like we're moving backwards, and we're digging ourselves into a deeper hole until the next crisis erupts, and then there's a backlash, and then we have to deal with those issues and say, okay, we got to be more involved. So no matter what, whether there's Islamophobia or not, whether there's anti-Semitism or not, we have to be involved. We have to be out there in leading our communities and our country.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Amal. Good evening. I'm very curious as to what, is it Dr. Muhammad? What was it?
Anna?
The one in the middle.
Salam?
Yeah, Dr. Salam. What did you mean exactly?
You called me doctor and you called me Muhammad. I'll take
what did you mean
both as a
exactly
compliment.
by Islam is opposing?
Is it what?
What do you mean exactly by Islam has an opposing attitude? This I don't understand, that it has an opposing attitude when most of the Middle Eastern countries, I should say Muslim countries, are surrounded by dozens of US military bases, and most of the unrest is in the Middle East. I don't see Islam anywhere. I don't see an Islamic State, I don't see an Islamic representative, I don't see any type of Islam anywhere unless it's coming through the White House. That's the only time I hear about Islam. So what do you mean opposing when most of the Muslims are being killed, tortured, raped?
Oh, no.
And,
I think you misheard me. I didn't say opposing. No, what I said is there's an attitude of authoritarianism in the Middle East. And from a secular standpoint, the dictatorship starts from the top, and there's a trickle-down theory that the weaker and weaker groups become oppressed by those that are deemed higher. And so it is imposing, not opposing. So there's an imposing attitude towards people. And religious groups, and this is what we mean by some of these Islamic groups, their idea is this is what is right for others, and therefore we're gonna shove it down your throat whether you like it or not, because this is good for you. And so it is an imposing attitude, as opposed to the attitude that I believe what Islam is. Islam is set to be a part of a pluralistic society where you form a model of Islam that is to be respected and admired and then hopefully emulated. And so Islam should be part of a religious pluralistic society that is not imposed on anyone.
Okay, that's
sorry, but we don't have time really for two individual polemics.
Let me just comment real quick.
Can you follow up after the panel, please?
But I don't want anybody to misunderstand.
Thank you, but you know, two individual polemics, we don't have time for that. We have only 5 minutes and there are 3 people behind you. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll take the whole group afterwards for coffee or something, talk.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom to Hannah and anybody else here. Yeah, my question is for Hannah. You did spoke about the past, the Holocaust and all that stuff, and it's really good to know about, but I really want to know, I want you to speak a few words about, what's the present situation we're having, in Palestine. You didn't really say anything about Palestine.
Right. George Mitchell was, and now David Hale is the special envoy on Middle East peace. That is not my job, so that's why I didn't talk about it. And next week, I may not have any choice but to somehow be involved in it. I do want to just say something. It's not what you asked me, but I feel a need to say it by both of the questions. When the Park 51 drama was happening in this country on television, it was a media event, I heard something very, very distressing to me. I kept throwing things at the television. And that was not only commentators on television, but even presidential candidates espousing some things. And this was basically their message. Muslims are trying to take over the world. They're trying to impose Sharia law on our country. They're trying to take over our financial institutions, which is why we need to have the Treasury Department have a whole wing following Muslim money. And next, they're going to take over the communication system through satellite TV. Now, have any of you heard of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion? The great Tsarist forgery. I like to call it the lie that won't die. It was made up in the late 1800s as a reason to do pogroms. Hitler used it. We know what happened. The accusations in the protocols are Jews are trying to take over the world. They're trying to impose Jewish law on everyone else. They're taking over the financial institutions, and they will take over all the communication systems. It seemed to me people were taking the horrid literature, hate literature, that has caused millions and millions of Jewish deaths, crossing off the word Jew and putting in the word Muslim, and making it somehow acceptable discourse in this country. It's unacceptable. It needs to be called out. I call it out every chance I can. I did on the television program we did together to the Middle East. I think it very important to see that some of the strategies that are being used, particularly in this country, to force discrimination, hatred, fear, etc. of Muslims is based on a strategy that did the same to Jews. And Jews need to recognize that similarity and call it out and make sure that we don't see a repeat. And this time it being the victims being Muslims.
Thank you. On the instruction of the moderator, I'm going to summarize my comments, actually just make it very brief. All three panelists spoke very eloquently about various issues pertaining to the topic of the panel. Aisha about the need of identity and education for Muslim communities, and Salam, you made a very important point, I think, about the change in the debate from race and nationality to religion and ideology. And I think, Hannah, you wonderfully summed it up by saying that symbolism is important. I think if we're going to look at education, at religion and ideology going forward, the symbolic importance that we should, I think, emphasize is that it's not just looking for role models in the Muslim community for people who are Muslim, but also to get national and local leaders of all backgrounds to be able to communicate and reach out to the Muslim community to say, as Americans, you are just as valued, just as entitled to play your full role in society, and should be. And I think it's just as important for Muslims to be volunteering an hour of their time in this 2011 hours. It's fantastic, and congratulations on the achievement of 13,000 hours.
How many hours are you going to give?
I'm going to give an hour right now, if you want.
Okay. Okay.
And I get everyone here to give an hour of their time. So you've got another 150 hours right here in this room. But I think it's also important, and I'll just finish quickly, for Muslims to be able to, for national leaders and local leaders to be able to come to the Muslim community and see how things are done among the 80 or so different nationalities in American Muslim life that Aisha talked about. And I hope that symbolism can be mutually exchanged, so much so that I hope that maybe for an hour you and Farah could change roles in the State Department, and we could see that on the street as well. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
My question is for Ms. Rosenthal.
I just think also the other important point is that right now I think the era for Muslim community is now to develop Muslims within civil society. In other words, institutions that represent us within nonprofit communities, so that we, when people say we don't hear from the Muslims, it's about everything. Because we are not there, for example, at the City Hall meetings, at the Rotary clubs, at the Chamber of Commerce meetings, things like that. So it can only be done by building civil society within the Muslim American community, and then for democracy to succeed in the Muslim world, also there needs to be the development of civil society there as well.
My question to Ms. Rosenthal. I think the peace initiatives that you talked about are highly commendable. Thank you for the work that you do at the grassroots level. But do you have any specific initiatives to target what I perceive as the root of hate mongering, like the Robert Spencers, the Pam Gellers, the Ann Coulters of the world?
If I did, I'd have a Nobel Prize. I don't know what possessed people to spew the hatred they do. I do think, and it's not in the drinking water, but it is almost as fundamental in some places. When I was in Lebanon and I met with young people, the most common thing they said to me is, I don't want to inherit the bigotry of my parents. When I am in the United States and I'm in a school and people tell me about growing up what their favorite stories were, and often they were Grimm's fairy tales. I don't know if your various cultures learned them in Western Europe and in the United States. We were raised on these fairy tales written by the Grimm's brothers. Well, the original Grimm's fairy tales, those weren't witches. Those were Jews. It's in the myth and symbol of the culture. And the myth and the symbol of the culture, when shook up, moves to fear, moves to hatred, moves to blame. And I don't know about Ann Coulter. I don't happen to think she has a belief. I think it's totally pomposity on her part. But I think that some, it's for political gain. It doesn't matter who fill in the blank on the hatred. But sometimes it's in the education, it's in the stories they're told. I mean, I've often thought about what it must be like to be a young kid who's a Muslim in the United States, where every single day since 9/11 of 2001, every cartoon, every news story, every front page of every paper at some point talked about Muslims that didn't resemble the Muslims they knew, their family, and what a challenge that is. I think that there are people who will recognize that and take advantage of that, and it's most unfortunate.
Wanted to add, I think also from our perspective as Muslims, we are dealing with Islamophobia, but we cannot define it as a Muslim problem alone. Islamophobia is an American problem. It's a problem for everyone. Everybody needs to be involved because, as Hannah said, hate against one group is hate against every group. It's a hate against American values. And so it is our calling, it is our, we're here in America to deal with this problem of hate because America will either be defined by the pluralistic foundation it was established on and everybody's included, or it will be driven by those who are exclusivists that look at us as just a nuisance or a threat, and it will hurt America. So we have to define Islamophobia as an American problem.
Thank you, panel. Great job. Excellent job. And of course, Mr. Yujasoy.